What, you want me to teach you something? You want to learn something?
You talking to me?
Just talking? Well, what's the show about?
It's about nothing.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Much Talk About Nothing. This one is particularly special. We got to interview one of my favorite comedians of all time, Mr. Greg Warren. And it was a fantastic interview, but I should warn you, you are going to notice a couple of things. Number one, the background is different when we get into the interview. Number two, I have this hat on now. I will not later. I'm going to look very different. And number three, Mr. Skillen also joined us. We lost the intro. That's embarrassing and sad, but that's just how it is. So here I am to say hi. Now, this does give me a unique opportunity to mention we just joined the Cultured Nerd Podcast Network. Absolutely loving it so far. You can go check out our other show on their YouTube channel, which is just The Cultured Nerd. It's called Through the Monocle. We just talked about The Dark Knight. It's a lot of fun. Recommend you go check that out. Give them a follow, subscribe, all that business. And be sure to follow us places. You can see us on YouTube at Much Talk About Nothing. Same on Instagram and on Twitter. We are at MTA and Podcast. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into the interview. Allow me to introduce to you Mr. Greg Warren. So, Mr. Warren, thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited to be talking to you. First question we kind of had was like, how did you get to where you are now? How did you get into like stand up?
I had a lot of false starts, I guess. I was sort of, I was probably desperately seeking some attention or outlet for attention when I was in high school. And then in college, a friend of mine worked at a comedy club as a bartender. I was on the wrestling team in college, and he wrestled with me, and he signed me up for some contest. And, I did the contest. But during college, I was mostly wrestling and doing school. So I did it very few times, but it was interesting to me. And then I thought maybe I'd do it after college, and I didn't. I don't know. There's something about the complete lack of structure that scared me. So I took a job at a company called Procter & Gamble. I was in sales there, and I did that job for 10 years, and off and on for those 10 years, I did stand up. And then the last 5 years, I did it quite a bit. And I was just doing open mic nights at first, and then probably that last 5 years, I was working as an MC. I was living in Cincinnati, and I was working as an MC at like 3 different clubs, one in Cincinnati, one in Dayton, and one in Columbus. And, at some point I started to get a little better, and I thought I was trying to finagle it so I could keep my job, because it was a really good job and I was making a lot of money, and I was scared to leave it, but I was trying to make it so I was like, okay, I can just straddle both. Like I was trying to get them to transfer me to New York and LA, and it almost happened a couple of times. And it wasn't happening quick enough. And finally I was like, okay, I just have to sort of step off the diving board. And I quit my job in 2001, thinking that I would probably have to return to some sort of a job once I, started running out of money. And luckily I haven't. We're about, 22 years later.
Wow. So you've been able to make like a consistent living for the last 21 years doing stand-up?
Yeah, consistent's a tricky word. I mean, the first several years were, I don't know. The first few years were pretty rough, but it wasn't rough in the sense like some guys are like starving artist types, and I wasn't. I mean, I had a good job where I made a bunch of money, and I saved a good amount of it. So those first 2 or 3 years, I was living off the savings and making, 20%, if that, of what I was making at my real, my job that I had before that.
Okay.
And then I got a couple of breaks, and things started going pretty well.
Yeah. I mean, I know I've started listening in the past couple of years, and like the material you have is fantastic. So that kind of leads me to the question of like, how do you come up with that? Like, is it all true stories, or is it semi-true? Or
yeah, I mean, I think it's all based in some truth. I think different people have different ways of creating material. The thing that I try to do every day is journal, which is, just sort of, I got it from some book where it's called The Artist Way, where you just write cursive for 3 or 4 pages in pen on a notebook and just sort of free write whatever's going on in your head, whatever happened. I kind of start with what happened yesterday, what happened the day before, who did I meet, how did I feel, what happened different. I mean, it's really hard to come up with what's funny. So you sort of look at what happened that doesn't normally happen, or what did I see that I don't normally see? What is interesting or different? And, sometimes you can turn that into what's funny. So I kind of start with something that happened or something that I saw. And then, by the time I get through with it, it doesn't completely resemble the thing that actually happened or, what I saw. You have to absurdify it a little bit, I think, to make it fun.
Yeah,
I
you
was just-
you
I was-
start it with the truth and then kind of branch out a little bit and add some stuff to it to make it funny.
Yeah, exaggerated. I mean, sometimes you do see this incongruency in the world that you just pointed out, and it's funny, and those are great. Sometimes you have to stretch it a little bit, or just come at it from a different angle, and make it a little absurd, and that's that's what makes it funny. I mean, I'm not a reporter, if I was just up there reporting what happened, I would get booed off the stage.
So was Steve not the best wrestler ever to live?
Steve Barrett? No,
Yeah.
I mean, that was a true story. I mean, I did wrestle in college. Steve Barrett was a guy that had wrestled he was a national champion for Oklahoma State. He was a local farmer. He did come in to wrestle me like once a week, and he did, just beat me to a pulp every week. And he was on the 1980 Olympic team. He was not the starter on the 1980 Olympic team, but he was on, I think he was, there's 3 guys in each weight class, and Steve was on the 1980 Olympic team. So, again, technically true, he was on the Olympic team, but it would, for the purposes of a joke or a story, you don't want to say he was the alternate on the, you say he was on the 1980 Olympic team, and he was, he was really, really good and a really nice guy. But yeah, he beat me. He was one of these guys that just, there was no, the coach was always like, well, you can learn something from him. I'm like, he was so unorthodox. I'm like, I could learn nothing from him. I could learn how to take a beating, which I guess is a valuable lesson, but I picked that up in one day. I didn't need that lesson every day for, 20 weeks. And it was funny. Steve was like he was a really nice guy. And he's very Christian. He was in Athletes in Action, and I think he got thrown out of Russia recently. Like right after I spent that time with him, he moved to Russia and was like teaching wrestling in Russia, and part of their community. And he was, he was a man of faith, and I think he worked for Athletes in Action, and he was spreading his religion. And, so one day after practice, coach let him kind of talk to us about what he did, and he started talking. I'm not a real religious guy, but I was like, hey, I'm not religious, Steve, but what I do know about religion is like, I don't think whoever's in charge would approve of what you just did to me. Like you can't talk to me about religion after just beating me with an inch of my life.
It is kind of hard to be like, Jesus saves and also get on the floor.
Yeah. It wasn't get on the floor. It was like, get up off the floor so I can put you back down on the floor. No, he was actually a really cool guy. And that year, I placed in the national tournament that year. And for the last match, Steve was in the corner, which is pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was really cool. With my head coach, but Steve, they let him sit in the corner. It was really cool.
Yeah. Wow.
So you mentioned, if you can go, Grant.
No, Grant, you take it.
Okay, so you mentioned you had your job and then you left your job and pursued stand-up. In the first couple of years, you were kind of living off of savings. What point Like, what was the turning point for you where you got these couple opportunities and you're like, okay, now I've sort of made it, and now you were making a living off of the stand-up?
My career, I don't think there's ever been one giant thing. It seems like it's always like little steps. But I can tell you, like, a few things happened. About a year after I quit my job, I got to go to the Montreal Comedy Festival, and that's a big deal. And it's hard to get in, and they invited me because I had to audition a couple times. And once I got that, like, I got a manager and an agent and a TV credit, and then things started rolling. And then I did the Bob and Tom radio show in the early 2000s for the first time, and I had listened to that show when I was driving to work back in Cincinnati, and they had they had comedians on all the time. I was like, wow, this is pretty cool, and I got to be on that, and it went well. And then I did a couple more appearances, and I had like one bit that really became popular with their listeners, and they put me on one of their CDs, which was a big deal back then. And then they had a tour where we were going around and doing like theaters, and that was it was a big thing. And once I started doing those tour dates, like, I was a headliner from that time on. Like, I didn't, and the difference between middle act, which is what I started doing when I quit my job, and headliner is a lot of money, and then once you're a headliner, it's like, headliner that sells this amount of tickets, and this amount of tickets. But yeah, that was a big deal for me. And then I've had several other small breaks, and what I thought, there's a couple moments when I was like, well, this is going to completely change my career and I'll be a household name, and it didn't work out. And then I would be like, well, I'm probably completely done with the business. It's over. And then I wasn't. I had some other thing that came along that was pretty cool.
So, as like part of that, when did you start recording specials and that kind of thing?
The first special, I think we shot back in the day, every comic wanted to have a half-hour special on Comedy Central. And I think we shot it in 2009, I think, or 2008. I think it aired in 2009. I'm not sure. Right around that time. And I had, that was a big deal for me. And then, I think the next thing I really put out that was a special, I put out a lot of CDs, but like video specials, was a dry bar comedy special, which I really didn't. My friend Keith, he runs it now, but he was like, you want to do this? And I was like, I don't know. It's just an internet thing. And I didn't understand, how good they were at marketing. And I was like, well, I'll just do it. I have this material that I put on a CD that nobody wants to do a special with. So let me just do this. And I didn't think much of it. And they're really, really good at getting views on the internet, and they're extremely good at social media, and they've got a built-in following. So I did that, and then that was probably like 2017 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then in 2020, I put out a special called Where the Field Corn Grows on Amazon Prime. And then just a couple of months ago, I shot a special, and we're not sure where that's going. That's going to be the guys that produced the Where the Field Corn Grows special, 800-Pound Gorilla. They partnered with a guy named Nate Bargatze, who's a really good comedian and a really successful comedian. Nate directed and co-produced my special. So we'll see when that comes out. I'm hoping, early 23, and I don't know where, but that's something that I'm really excited about.
That's awesome. The dry bar special was actually my introduction to your work.
Oh, cool, man. Oh.
Yeah. And so like I might, Dad, you got to watch this. I bring my dad in, and he's like, this is hilarious. And so we like have gone through and listened to everything.
Oh, thanks, dude. Yeah.
So on these tours, sorry, Grant, on these tours and just shooting specials, where are some of the coolest places you've been able to just perform and do your stand-up and do your sets at?
Yeah, man. I mean, I'm lucky now because there's not many that aren't cool. Back in the day, there were a few that weren't that cool. But I mean, there's some cities that I've been going to forever that I love, and I love the club, and I love the people that run the club. My hometown, St. Louis, is probably my favorite place to play, and that next week that's like the 1 week out of the year that I play there. And then I'm in Cincinnati this weekend which is a great place. Columbus, Ohio is a great place. Omaha, Nebraska, is a great place. Pittsburgh is one of my favorite towns. And, a lot of those have to do with the club or the people that run the club or, the radio station in that market. Bloomington, Indiana has a really neat comedy club that I love going to.
Would not have
And,
expected
it's
Indiana.
cool to go to places.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bloomington is a really small town, but it's got just amazing comedy club. I always like performing in Austin, Texas. Great place. I like going to I lived in Houston for a while, so I like going back there.
Okay. Wow.
That makes sense. Yeah, Bloomington, Indiana. Never would have thought of that.
Yeah, it's just a guy that's was a comedy fan, and now is a guy that he's a friend of mine, and he's meticulous about every detail of a comedy club. I mean, he's a maniac when it comes to like every little detail. But he's it works, and he's a funny guy, and they have a kind of a community that really supports comedy, and he takes chances, and it's there's no reason why that club should exist and get the acts that it does, but it's a great place. Yeah, it only seats like 150 people. It's pretty neat.
Wow, that sounds awesome.
Where do you guys live?
We're in Alabama.
Okay, cool.
Huntsville area.
Yeah. I've never performed there. Performed in Birmingham. That's a neat. The Stardome's a neat place.
Yep.
Yeah.
We've got
been there in a while, but
we've got Stand Up Live up here. That's kind of our...
yeah, man. I've heard that's good. Yeah, that a friend of mine has a piece of that. I know Brian Dorfman out of Nashville, I think, owns a piece of that club.
I didn't realize that. That's awesome. So, what would you consider to be your best bit? Like, what usually gets the best reaction?
It's a tough one. I mean, there's certainly the bit that I am known for the most is a bit called Flute Man. A bit where I played the clarinet in high school and wrestled on the team, and that bit got popular on several radio shows, and so that's the bit that people have asked for. But the bit that I probably like the most now is I did a whole thing about when I was in sales and sold peanut butter, and that's like I have like 15 minutes about peanut butter on my special that's coming out soon, and that's the thing that I like the most. And it's always your latest bit that you're in love with the most. But yeah, the thing that people probably know me the most for is Flute Man.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that new special with the peanut butter.
Oh, thanks, man.
Just new material in general. Grant, you got a question to go with next?
Yeah, has there ever been a joke that you thought would work, but you just went up and said it and it just didn't get a reaction?
Sure, man. Every comic does. I mean, and I don't think any of us really know it's going to work until you try it on stage. You think it's going to work, and sometimes I'm pretty sure it's going to work. And usually you got to believe in the idea. Like if you have an idea, and you think it's funny, it's funny. It is. You just, it may take you a week, 2 weeks, so people see what you're seeing. And sometimes, more often than not, I think there's something funny about this, but it hasn't quite crystallized in my brain exactly as funny. Like what? So you go up there and you wing it. And you're like, blah, 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 and people are like, yeah, we don't understand what you're trying to say. And as a young comic, like, well, that's just not funny. Well, no, man, you don't know what's funny about that yet. So don't expect them to know exactly what's funny about it. And that's not a bad process. Like, for me, I'm like, something's funny in this subject. I need to go on stage for several months and figure out exactly what's funny about it. But young comics and, some of my friends are like, yeah, that thing's not funny. I'm like, no, man, it is. You don't exactly know. It smells funny. So you gotta, you put it on stage, but you have to be more precise than that, I think, to have a really strong bit, maybe even a workable bit.
So do you have I'm
not sure if that makes sense.
No,
it does. You got to find, I don't know why this popped in my head, but you have to find like the little piece of poop in the trash can, find the one thing that makes it funny.
I guess
And
that's
then
one way of looking at it.
I don't know why that's what popped in my head,
Yeah,
but
I mean, yeah. I think stand up is a very precise, at least the kind that I like. I shouldn't say like the kind that mostly I do. I mean, there's some guys that are just very funny people, and I've seen guys on stage that I'm not sure the audience could tell you why they're laughing. Or or the comedian knows why people are laughing. They're just funny people and funny personalities, and those guys I would say are like more performance based acts, and I kind of like a little bit of both. I want the writing to be precise and then add a little bit of performance to it. And I didn't set out to be that way. I just sort of backed into that.
Like you do impressions and that kind of thing that I think really sell the jokes.
Yeah, characters, I would say. I mean, I don't really do, impressions of people that people know, but yeah, because I'm not that good at that. If everybody's going to do their Christopher Walken or whatever, mine's going to be certainly not one of the best. It's like that.
Yeah.
But I can sound like somebody you've never heard.
But it's like your Clem. It's like every old man I've ever heard speak, all rolled up into
thanks,
one.
man. Yeah, that is. I would guess that's based on a guy named Stan. That Stan came to the comedy club in St. Louis every night for like 30 years. And that's and one day just screwing around, me and my friend Mike McRae started doing a Stan impression. And somebody was like, "Oh my God, you actually sound like Stan." I was like, "Okay, I got to figure out how to put that in my act." And then sometimes I go back and forth. Like when I was living in New York, I think my writing got a little more precise because you sort of need to be there. And I think I lost a little bit of the fun of some of the characters in my act. So this next special, there's a guy that kind of helped me get started in comedy, and Freddie DeMarco. He's a very, very distinctive personality and a very distinctive voice. And I've always been able to do a version of him, and people are like, "Greg, man, that's Freddie. I can't believe you do Freddie." And I'm like, I set out to do two things in the pandemic. I was like, I'm gonna in my next hour, I'm gonna have Freddie in the air, and I'm going to somehow make my experience at Procter and Gamble funny. And I think I did both. So
Can't wait to see what that sounds like. So you mentioned you have to get on stage to see if it's funny. Do you have just like a person or people that you bounce things off of before you stand on stage?
Yeah, not a lot. You gotta have somebody that you really trust and sort of gets you, because like my brother's a funny guy. My brother's really funny, and I remember early on I was like, "Hey man, what do you think of this?" And he's like, "Yeah." And then your heart's broken. You're like, yeah, you lose confidence in ideas. And, but my friend Mark Gross is a television writer, was a comic forever. And then he's been a very, very successful TV writer and producer for years. And I talk to him almost every day. And we just get each other, and he's the best guy in the world to run bits by. My friend Brendan Ayer is a great comic that I can always run bits by. And then, there's maybe once every year, Mike Birbiglia and I will sort of, a guy that I've known forever. Mike's, really funny and really successful and doesn't have a ton of time, but every now and then, like once a year, Mike and I will sort of be like, "Hey, you want to run some stuff by each other?" My friend Joe Zimmerman, who's really, really good. Joe is a guy that, every now and then I'll be like, we'll schedule it. Mark and Brendan, I'll just call up. With Joe, I'll be like, "Hey, Joe calls it Joke Machine." He's like, "You want to do Joke Machine next Monday or something?" Yeah. So yeah, it's not a ton of people, but those are the main people.
So you guys have like just kind of a community, I guess, that just generates these things.
Yeah, not like informal in any way, but they're just friends over the years.
That's awesome. So, is there anything you would say to like a young comedian who's just getting started, maybe is that in that starving artist phase? I know you mentioned sticking through the bits that smell funny, but is there something else that you would really tell someone?
Yeah, man. I mean, there's a million things, and I think sometimes it gets real. Are you guys comics?
Not yet. Not
okay.
We try sometimes. It always falls flat.
Well, yeah, you should do it then. that's the one. That's another. If you think you might want to do it, just start right now. Just start, because it takes forever to get comfortable on stage. And then usually, if you like talk about it more than twice, you're going to wind up doing it. It's really hard, so just, so I would say there's a million things. I'll pick some of my favorites. However you make your friends laugh or your family, whatever, that's probably the persona that's going to work best for you on stage. Probably doesn't have to be. There's some guys that don't write like pen to paper and they're great, but I think you got to figure out a way to set aside some time every day to do pen to paper. I think the mornings are usually the best for me. That's usually afternoon. Once noon hits, like I'm not going to come up with anything all that creative. And then, a lot of listening to your act. And this one, my friend Ron Morey, who's this great comic, told me 20 years ago or something. He said, record every show. He goes, and listen to your show. But he said, listen to it while you're doing something else. Like, don't just sit there and obsess over it. You can do that. That's one exercise. But another exercise is listen, while you're doing the dishes or while you're driving or even while you're, surfing the internet. You start to get used to some of the rhythms in your voice, and you start to make subconscious adjustments. And I guess one way to describe it is, if you guys start doing it for a while, a lot of comics can walk through the back of a room and hear their friend on stage and immediately know, like, if he switches that word with that word and gets that word out of there, that joke's going to be better. Okay. It's just a thing that you pick up. But when they look at themselves, they have a harder time identifying that. That's probably because you're having all kinds of hangups about it. You're like, well, God, is that how I sound? Oh, I'm terrible. I quit my job, and now, like, you have all this emotional garbage in the way. But if you do that exercise where, you're subconsciously listening and you're doing the dishes, you forget that it's you and it's just some guy talking, and you just start, you have different inflections in your voice. You start dropping words. You start pausing a little bit more, and you make these adjustments that really wind up helping. And that's something that you have to do quite a bit. But that was a really good one. Thank you, Ron Morey.
Wow, I'd never really thought of that, doing it while doing something else.
Yeah, it's especially when you're, in your first 5 years. That's a vital. It's just because you really don't. Man, it took me a long time to sort of figure out how to deliver material on stage. It was so awkward early on. And then I, started overcompensating. I was like the angry guy on stage for a while, and that was effective. And it got me through a time when I was, new in clubs, and it worked. But then as I listened, I was like, that's not exactly who I am. I need to dial that down a little bit. I don't want to be one-liner guy. I don't want to be, I think I probably went through like a Stephen Wright phase, which is completely opposite who I am. Or, I worked with Mitch Hedberg early in my career, and it's so hard not to adopt his cadence or Dave Attell's cadence, because they're brilliant, and it's very addictive to listen to. And so many comics around my generation, I spent a day or two sounding like Dave or Mitch. One time I think Dave was doing a show with me, and I was like, just on one line, I'm like, sound exactly like Dave. I'm like, oh my God, you must think that's terrible. The guy's so good, he's such a genius.
Yeah, I can see how listening, doing something else, it helps you, kind of like you said, take the focus off of it's you doing it. It's almost like you're listening to someone else, and then you can pick up on those subtle things that you can change to improve it. That makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, that's again, that's a guy named Ron Morey, comic down in Phoenix, and that's some of the best advice. Ron was also the guy that told me to do characters, because we would doing shows, and I'd be kind of doing these jokes on stage, and in the bar at this place called the Houston Laugh Stop, I'm like making people laugh, doing impressions of Freddie or other people, and he's like, man, you got to do more of that on stage. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah.
Well, just as a fan, I have to ask. So, like, when did the 1-star people bit come around?
You know what that was? I think I had a bit about like something about like I'll karate. I overheard somebody say I'll karate fight you, and there's something funny. And I think I was like, I think I called them white trash. And my friend Mike Birbiglia was like, man, white trash sounds a little harsh. You gotta, I don't know about that. And I was like, well, yeah, but how am I gonna? And then I don't know. Somehow I was doing bits about hotels and people, and I was like, oh, there's 1-star hotels. There's also 1-star people. And I don't think I'm the only one to like. I think maybe Tom Waits said something about that in a song. Somebody told me, or maybe I heard it. But yeah, that was about. I was trying to do bits about people that were, quote unquote white trash at hotels, and yeah, and that karate fighting bit was in there. I'd overheard somebody say, "I'll karate fight you," and yeah, and I remember Mike being like, "Nah, man, you can't say white trash." And then I was like, "You can't say redneck," because at the time that was Jeff Foxworthy's whole thing, and it was like, yeah, it's like you're sort of co-opting what he's saying. So yeah, that is just a different way of saying white trash or redneck.
Yeah, I like that bit with the karate fight, and I like the one with the woman bringing in the log.
Oh yeah, that was. I'll be honest about that one, and that was. I don't do that quite as much anymore. I have a little more stringent, but that was my friend Tom McCullough and Jason Burning were at a wedding in Kansas City, and they were like, "Yeah, this woman, that happened. I was not there. That definitely happened." They were like, "Yeah, there was a fight, and this lady dragged in a log and said, 'Do him like you done Donnie.'" And they're like, "What? Who is Donnie?" And then again, it's like you try to almost cross-examine the event, be like, "Well, where's Donnie? Probably laid up in a hospital somewhere with a log embedded into his head." Yeah. But that happened somewhere south of Kansas City, I think. Yeah.
I mean, I'm just
like
looking.
You done Donnie.
Like, what are the two comics that were there doing there with people that would bring a log to a fight?
Those guys weren't even comedians. Those are my friends from college, man. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes more sense.
Those weren't comedians. They were just my buddies from college, and they're like, "Hey, man, yeah." And I was like, "Hey, I'm gonna tell that story. That's amazing."
That is nuts.
Doing like you done Donnie. It wasn't a stick; it was a log.
I think I'm pretty much out of questions. Grant, do you have any more?
So I'm a fan of dad jokes. Do you have
Oh,
like
yeah.
a go-to dad joke or a couple go-to
Oh,
dad
you mean
jokes?
like dad joke? By dad joke, that means like silly or
Corny or yeah.
not really. I mean, I love street jokes, but I don't know if I would say I have. I mean, some girl one time was like, "I love your dad jokes." I'm like, "What?" I don't think I. I mean, I do have a couple of puns in every special, so maybe that's what she's thought.
Maybe do you have a couple favorite puns then, or
No, I'm trying to think of my. Nah, I don't know. Sorry, dude.
sorry, I put you on the spot, so it's all good.
Yeah, man. Whoever wrote all those street jokes is some genius that didn't get paid.
This means he wasn't very smart about doing it.
I don't know, man. The guy's no, he was one of the smartest people in the world. Wrote all those old street jokes that old guys will tell you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Like, it's been an
Yeah,
absolute
sure, man.
pleasure.
Yeah, you bet, guys. Yeah.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. Sorry for the abrupt ending. I forgot to ask him what he would like to plug, but just so you guys know where to follow him, go do that on Instagram at GRockWarren. He posts some hilarious reels. They're really good. Go check out his website, which is gregwarrencomedy.com. That's also a really good place to find like tour dates and stuff like that. Go check out all his specials. He has links to them on the website. They are fantastic. And next week, we're going to be interviewing Mr. Gabe Lee, who is a country music up-and-comer. And until then, I've been Grant Ingram for Grant Skillen and Mr. Greg Warren. See you next time.